Cool. So a little bit of a non-traditional one again for Whiteboard Wednesday. This time I want to talk about how you can think about scaling yourself in your career and just like a framework around leverage and experimentation that I think is very, very helpful. And instead of applying it again to a business or a product, I'm going to apply it to career growth. One of the things that I personally did, and again, just using my story as a way to make it real, is when I took a role at my prior company, LiveRamp, I was actually paid below other offers that I had. But I felt that the company had much more growth potential, and therefore I had much more growth potential. And so I basically had this view that if I were to join one of the other larger companies, like my growth in comp and impact would be like this, but at LiveRamp it would be like this. And I assumed that this was basically the 2 year mark. And so I was like, okay, if that's true, not only will I catch up in 2 years, but I'll be much better positioned because the slope of my career will be much higher. Now, and that's all like makes sense. So then the question is like, okay, what do you actually do to go about enabling those sorts of outcomes, assuming that the company has the opportunity? Now, the very first thing that must be true is that the company must have the opportunity for you to grow. So if you think you can grow like this, the company must be growing like this, or even better yet, must be growing like this. So that way, there's always opportunities for you to grow at, at, at even if it's not at the same pace as the company, your overall growth is still tremendous, right? So that's the first thing is you just got to actually pick a company that's growing very fast. Now, what is your job in that situation? The first thing is like the base set of things that you need to do is you need to drive incredible outcomes. Okay, so like basically it's just like, hey, do your job, and if you're doing your job because the company is growing, you will grow with the company. So this is like your base case scenario. Now, the next step after that, in order to drive leverage, is you identify problems. Okay, so it's like, hey, I noticed that this thing is breaking. And what that does is it creates pathways for you, depending on what is breaking and how it's breaking, that sets you up to do one of these things, where now you can branch off of your base case because it's like, hey, wait a second, nobody is filling this gap. And again, this sort of thing happens in high growth companies. So it's, hey, I've noticed that nobody is taking ownership over this, or we now have this new problem, and I think somebody should do something about it. And then where you get the growth, obviously, is you solve that problem. Okay. So it's like, hey, here are my options. All right. Here's one that I can actually solve. And now all of a sudden your growth goes from this to this. And the rate at which you grow can accelerate very, very fast if you just keep repeating this cycle. Now, I've talked about this a bunch on LinkedIn and things like that. The way that you identify problems, it's like you've got to pick good problems, right? Pick good problems. And how do you pick a good problem? It's sort of easy. You ask your boss, what are your top three problems? And then you ask the CEO, what are your top three problems? And this is one of those things that I feel like I say a lot and very, very few people do. I have been told recently, I have one friend that I can verify has actually done this and it is working for him. And nobody, I must have told this to hundreds of people. And I cannot think of anybody else who has actually implemented this with consistency other than this one friend. And I cannot uh, overstate how impactful it is for your career and for your ability to scale yourself. Because again, and again, all of this is relevant in a high growth context, but if the company is growing really fast, there's always going to be problems. You just need to know how to pick the right ones. And then you can actually do something about it. And then you will grow exceptionally fast. And so this is just a general framework for thinking about scaling yourself and how to iterate very quickly into what are the types of things to be working on that are going to create the biggest impact for the place where you're working. All right, hope that was helpful.